Good morning, dear children. Today we are continuing with our chapter The Rise of Nationalism in Europe, and today we are beginning with our new heading of this chapter The French Revolution and the Idea of Nation. I already explained you the French Revolution, and we also discussed that we have already learnt it in class 9th. Today we are having a brief look at what things happened in French and how the idea of nationalism from France spread to other parts of the Europe. Now let's start reading the text. The first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. So this we already know. France, as you would remember, was a full-fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of absolute monarch. This we learnt already. Then we saw how the transfer of sovereignty from monarchy to a body of French citizens was desired by people. Afterwards, we saw the idea of la patrie and le citoyen. Then we saw a new French flag that was actually a tricolor was formed and which was replacing the royal French standard flag. Now today we are beginning with the last second paragraph of this page from here. The revolutionaries further declared that it was a mission and destiny of French nation to liberate the people of Europe from despotism, in other words to help the people of Europe to become nations. So this we know that what is a despotism that I explained you yesterday, it was actually a form of monarchy. So the revolutionaries wanted the people to get free or liberated from that part. Now, here from our main part starts for today. When the news of events in France reached different cities of Europe, students and other members of educated middle class began setting up Jacobin clubs. So this thing we know, there were formation of Jacobin clubs. So the question can be, what happened when the news of events in the France reached different cities of Europe? So first point we discussed. The second was that their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland and much of the Italy in 1790s. So it was a time when the France armies they moved to other parts of Europe like Belgium, Switzerland, Italy. With the outbreak of revolutionary wars, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. So after that, at different parts of Europe, the idea of nationalism was also carried. So now let's read the next page. So students, you see over here, within the wide swath of territory. Now swath is actually a broad strip, or we can say a broad area of territory came under his control. Napoleon set about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. So whatever reforms that we saw he introduced in France, actually he abolished monarchical system, but he imposed his own rules and laws which are also harsh to the people of France. And similarly, as he captured other parts of Europe, the same thing he implied for everywhere. Through a return to monarchy, Napoleon had no doubt destroyed democracy in France. But in administrative field, he had incorporated revolutionary principles in order to make the whole system more rational and efficient. So he wanted the rules and laws to be followed efficiently. From here we see a new question, that is describe the Napoleonic Code of Conduct of 1804. It is a very important board examination question. Many times it has been asked. The Civil Code of 1804, usually known as Napoleonic Code, did away all the privileges based on birth, established equality before the law and secured the right to property. These were the three main things that were in the Civil Code of 1804. This code was exported to regions under French control. In the Dutch Republic, in Switzerland, in Italy as well as in Germany, Napoleon simplified administrative division, abolished feudal system and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. So it was in Italy, Germany and Switzerland where the manorial dues were removed. Transport and communication system were also improved. Peasants, artisans, workers, new businessmen enjoy a newfound freedom. Businessmen and small-scale producers of goods in particular began to realize that uniform laws, standardized weights and measures, and a common system of laws and national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. Now, this was actually the Napoleonic Code of Conduct and is very important. However, in the areas conquered, the reaction of local population to French rule were mixed. Now, what was such things that happened? So now let us read it. Initially, in many places like Holland, Switzerland, in certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, and Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as harbingers of liberty. So, people of different parts of Europe thought France as the beginners of the freedom or liberty. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned into hostility as it became clear that the new administrative arrangement did not go in hand with the political freedom. So actually we thought of Napoleon giving us a democratic rights and political freedom, but it was not actually. What people saw was a liberalism, but it does not make any sense since there was no political freedom even in the rule of Napoleon. Increased taxation, censorship. Censorship is an act of forcing someone, or for we say that if you are not doing something, then we are going to beat you, or we are going to torture you, or we are going to imply harsh conditions on you. That is a censorship. Forced conscription into French armies required to conquer the rest of Europe all seem to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. Now we will see how the nationalism was made in Europe. If you look at the map of the mid 18th century of Europe, you will find that there were no nation states as we know them today. Yesterday we learnt that Europe wanted nation states to be formed that were independent and were liberal. But at that time, there were no such nation states formed. What we know today as Germany, Italy, Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, cantons whose rulers had their autonomous territories. So there were actually duchies, cantons or small areas which have a specific ruler and acquiring any particular area. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse peoples. They did not see themselves as sharing collective identity or a common culture. Often they even spoke different language and belonged to different ethnic groups. So there was a huge diversity in the areas of Europe. Wherever we see the small areas which are conquered by any particular empire were actually having a variety or diversity of people which were living over there. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and people. So, Austria Hungary was ruled by Habsburg Empire. It is a one mark question. It included Alpine region, Tyrol, Austria, Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the aristocracy was predominantly German speaking. So, there mainly the people were German speaking, yet other people or other communities which were spoke different language were also present. It also included the Italian speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. So there the Italian speaking provinces were also present. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, while the other half spoke variety of dialects. In Galicia, aristocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominant groups, there also lived within the boundaries of empire a mass of subject peasant people, Bohemians, Slovaks to north, Slovens in Carniola, Croats to south, Romans to east, and Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. Actually, you do not need to learn these all the names. You just need to learn that the duchies and cantons, which were owned by private rulers, itself had a vast variety and vast diversity of people. So it was not possible to accommodate them all. So that's why it was necessary for the formation of nation states. But before that, the condition we saw right now. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor. So they all wanted the complete liberalism from the empire rule. So that was the main thing that was uniting them all. Now we are studying about the aristocracy and the new middle class. Socially and politically, a landed aristocracy was a dominant class on the continent. So we see that the aristocracy actually is a high social class or the people who belong to rich caste. So it was small but it was dominant in the Europe. The members of this class were united by a common way of life that cut across regional division. They owned estate in countryside as well as in the town houses. They spoke French as in estates in the now for purposes of diplomacy and in higher society. So for gaining education and for becoming a member of higher society, the language that they spoke was France. Their families were often connected by ties of marriage. This powerful aristocracy was, however, numerically a small group. The majority of population was made up of peasantry. Aristocrats were minor and peasants were major. To the west, the bulk of land was farmed by tenants and small owners, while in Eastern and Central Europe, the pattern of landholding was characterized by the vast estate which were cultivated by serfs. So this is also one mark question. In Western and parts of Central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and emergence of commercial class whose existence was based on production for the market. Industrialization began in the England in second half of 18th century, but in France and the parts of German states it occurred only during the 19th century. So industrialization was a process gradually for developing of the nations. In other parts of the Europe it was from the 18th century, but in France it was from the 19th century. In its wake new social groups came into being, a working class population, middle classes made up of industrialists, businessmen, professionals, and in the Central and Eastern Europes these groups were smaller in number till the late 19th century. It was among the educated liberal middle class that the ideas of national unity, followed by the abolition of aristocratic privileges, gained popularity. So here we saw that how industrialization actually brought about a change in the people of Europe, and how aristocracy was abolished, which gained some popularity also at the later time. So that's all for today, students. Thank you and have a nice day.